history that has brought you to reside on a land and to understand your place within that history. And if you're zooming in from a location that is not San Diego, California, you can always look up your own land acknowledgement via Google if you're interested in doing that later on. So now that we've done that, we'll jump into our first icebreaker. So for this icebreaker, does that make us who we are as an individual? So going into that, I would like to just start off with kind of talking about diversity and inclusivity before we start to talk about inclusive languages and addressing some of our biases that we might have. So first things first is, what is diversity? So we throw around the term diversity a lot, and I think it means a lot more than just showing visual representation on a school pamphlet or in staffing. Diversity means more than just acknowledging and or tolerating difference. It's a set of conscious practices that we involve, which includes understanding and appreciating interdependence of humanities, cultures, and the natural environment. It really includes practicing mutual respect for qualities and experiences that are different from our own. And so in understanding that, we understand that diversity is not only ways of being, but also ways of knowing. And recognizing that sometimes we might experience personal, cultural, and institutionalized discrimination, which can create and sustain privileges for some, while creating and sustaining disadvantages for others. And so what we really want to do is ensure that we're constantly thinking about how we can build alliances across our differences so that we can work together to kind of minimize or eradicate all forms of discrimination, right? So diversity includes, knowing how to relate to those qualities and conditions that are different from our own and outside of the groups to which we belong to, but might be present in other individuals and groups. And these things are included, but not limited to age, ethnicity, class, gender, physical abilities and qualities, race, sexual orientation, educational background, work experiences, all of those collective differences. And finally, we acknowledge that the categories of difference are not always fixed. They can be fluid, and we respect individual rights to self-identification, while also recognizing that there is not no one culture that is intrinsically superior to another. And so next, going into, what is inclusion? It's a word that is not often used in our daily speech, but it's always nice to remember that diversity and inclusion go hand in hand. And so inclusion and the process of inclusion engages each individual and makes sure that people really feel valued as being essential to the success of an organization or a group or a project, an idea, or a program or an event, right? And so for you all as student leaders, especially in terms of if you're programming, inclusivity to you all might mean that deliberate act of welcoming diversity and creating an environment where all different kinds of people can thrive and succeed and feel comfortable sharing their ideas and comfortable meeting one another and forming those connections. And so sometimes we can kind of think of the mix of diversity and inclusion as baking a cake, for example. So a diverse and inclusive organization is kind of like a fruit cake where your ingredients are spread evenly and consistently throughout the mixture. And as you're taking your slices, you can see that that slice is kind of like your perfect slice, right? But kind of within, if you were to make a cake and maybe not follow the instructions, or maybe you're just haphazardly throwing ingredients in and not really being mindful of the collective differences within the ingredients, you might get a cake that isn't really properly baked. And so going back on our inclusivity means looking back at how the recipe or the ingredients or method for mixing can be reviewed, to make sure that things are a little bit more cohesive and that it's a little bit more equal and that everyone involved is feeling accepted and welcome. So just keeping in mind, simply having a diverse group or team or classroom is not enough. We have to do more to ensure that everyone is feeling safe and encouraged to fully participate and on equal footing. So why does it all matter? I mean, I think, of course, we all know that everyone should be feeling welcomed and accepted. But more importantly, diversity and keeping in mind all of these concepts within diversity and inclusion and equity work means that you're enhancing your own social development. Um, Interacting with people from a variety of groups really helps widen your circle. And it helps expand the pool of people whom you associate and develop relationships with. And so therefore, it's really preparing you for work in a global society. You know, no matter what profession you end up entering post-college, you'll find yourself working with a wide, diverse range of backgrounds on a worldwide level. So by experiencing this in college, you're laying down that groundwork to really feel comfortable working and interacting with a variety of people, and also keeping in mind kind of some of those pitfalls around you and where things can be improved so that everyone feels a little bit more welcomed. You know, research consistently shows that the more that we learn from people who are different from us than we do from people who are similar to us, the more we're expanding our capacity for viewing issues or problems from multiple perspectives, angles, and vantage points. And so keeping in mind the goals of diversity inclusion and how we would like to give everyone equal experiences, I think it's also important to keep in mind that oftentimes what people might experience is a colorblind mindset or theory or perspective. And so although color blindness might seem well-intentioned because you're viewing everyone on equal footing or being on the same level of groundwork, it's also not seeing everyone's unique value and also not seeing our differences in identities and race, which can create systemic race issues and which can also invalidate the lived experiences of other people. So, you know, it's kind of the concept of like, it's hard to address what you can't see. And so although we appreciate that it's well-intentioned, it's more important that we address some of these harder conversations to really talk about the differences that we might experience in our day-to-day lives. And so in acknowledging these differences, there's three really important concepts that I want you all to kind of keep in mind, which is, first of all, keeping an open mind. You know, really kind of think about as we're going through this presentation, but also after the presentation, like how has your lived experiences up to this point influenced your reactions to differences that you encounter in college? Um, and what is that process that you kind of take when you're meeting new people? And in doing so, you can start to challenge some of these stereotypes that we might subconsciously form. So later on, I'll kind of talk about this, but with bias, bias is often formed out of stereotypes. And stereotypes is something that is taught and learned in even the most subtle ways. And so it's really best to try to avoid projecting assumptions onto people when you're meeting new people from anywhere, even if it's a simple, you know, class project that you're kind of meeting a new classmate in, and really allowing yourself to get to know people without any preconceived notions. And I think a really good example of this is kind of, you know, when you're in a social setting and you might meet someone who you might have heard a lot of opinions about or gossip about, and you start to learn after talking with that person that maybe some of the things that others have said about that person is not 100% correct, or not 100% from that person's perspective, right? So really working toward challenging and overcoming stereotypes that we might bring with us and that we might have learned along the way and that we might still be learning as we are, you know, growing throughout life. And so it's also in understanding and respecting our differences. You know, you might not always agree with others, but um, always try to approach conversations as respectfully as possible and try to hear out everyone's opinions and perspectives as you start to have some of these harder conversations and as you start to address bias and incorporating inclusive languages. Really be honest and open and willing to learn from your differences. I think that none of us know everything. And even myself, as I give this presentation, the more that I talk about this, the more that I learn myself about things. And it's always nice to just be able to acknowledge, like, I'm being honest and I'm coming to a space saying that I might not know it all, but I'm also willing to learn from others on how I can improve myself, um, and how I can kind of change some of my preconceived notions that I might have. And so now we can kind of talk about like how are we using this day to day, but also how can we use this in programming, for example. So one of the things that I really like to do, and it's also what we started off doing in this meeting, is sharing pronouns. So sharing pronouns is a really, really easy way to help ensure that everyone feels comfortable in the space. And it's as easy as doing it at the beginning of meetings, or when you're meeting someone new, or you're doing introductions. You can write it on name tags. You can change your Zoom name and add your pronouns in there as well. But some of the ways that you can do it in day-to-day conversation is maybe, starting off with an example of yourself. So saying like, hi, my name is Snisa and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. What about you? Or, hey, I would just like to know, you didn't share when you shared your name. What pronouns do you like to use? Or how would you like me to refer to you? It's kind of also, the steps that you take when you're like, hey, do you have a nickname that you would like me to use instead of your preferred name, or instead of the name that's on your file? Just like small reassurances like that. But just adding in pronouns to make sure that we're addressing everyone properly when we're having our breakout rooms or our group projects. And the next is incorporating inclusive language. I'll go over this within the next slide, but there's a few key concepts in incorporating inclusive language. And I think oftentimes within learning the English language, it's not so much within that groundwork of taking the time to really think about some of the terms or sayings that we've kind of learned over time, and how those things can be possibly harmful. And the next is name pronunciation and preferred names. So it's always nice to just um, maybe ask for pronunciations if you're unsure. Like, hi, could you help me? Could you let me know how to pronounce your name, for example? Or I see that you've written your name down as this. Would you like to keep this as your preferred name? Or is there another name that you would prefer me to address you as? So that gives opportunity if someone would like to make the changes, or if they see that the change isn't made already, they can do so then. And then next is the steps within your planning stages of like a program or event. So asking questions like, how is my event involving all students? How is it inclusive? Are there any barriers preventing other students from being able to attend or feel welcomed? And those barriers can be things such as like maybe the topic being addressed within program, or even a physical barrier. What are ways that I can be more accommodating, or my group can be more accommodating? How will this event impact other students? And am I overall utilizing some of my inclusive practices at this moment? And so looking more into pronouns and using pronouns, as I've said before, pronouns are words that we use to refer to either people talking, or someone or something that is being talked about. Gender pronouns specifically refer to people that you're talking about. There's a few examples here of pronouns such as he, she, they, and z, and how we can use those pronouns and incorporate them into our language. It's really important that we emphasize pronouns also because within our UCSD community, we want to make sure that we're just using the most basic form of showing respect, which is for someone's gender identity that they've outlined for themselves. And this can kind of really determine within the first few minutes if they feel respected within a space or not. You can't always know someone's gender pronoun just by looking at them. And so when someone is referred to with the wrong pronoun, it can make them feel disrespected or invalidated or dismissed or alienated or hurt. And so many people are also learning about gender pronouns for the first time as they're coming onto campus from wherever environment that they're coming from. And so it's also a really good learning opportunity for the community as well. And you can really set an example for your peers and your colleagues. Um, it's okay to not immediately have it down. It's something that um, sometimes can take a lot of practice, especially if English might not be like your first language, for example. But always just be open to being corrected or correcting yourself and apologizing. I think oftentimes when you're interacting with people and you're being genuine, they can tell that you're making the genuine effort, and just a simple like, oh, I'm totally sorry, and readdressing them as their proper pronoun, will just kind of restart that and reset that interaction between you all. I think oftentimes what kind of might feel worse is really harping on the fact that you're sorry, like, I'm so sorry, I can't believe I did that, I feel so bad. And that can put a lot of pressure and burden onto the person who you might have gotten the wrong pronoun for. It's better to just say, hi, I'm sorry. Feel free to correct me at any point if I ever get it wrong in the future, and kind of just moving on. And the next is going more into our inclusive language. So inclusive language is really the concept of avoiding bias or slang or expressions that might discriminate against groups of people based on race, gender, or socioeconomic status, for example. Um, there's a few basics that you can incorporate into greetings, such as saying like, hi all, or hi you all, good morning folks, instead of using gendered greetings such as hello ladies and gentlemen, or hey guys. Just like incorporating those small differences within your daily language. And we can really see those concepts play out, such as ways that we put people first, for example. So saying things like, we have a child with autism versus putting the disability first, such as in saying like autistic child. And this really allows us to put the individual first and to appreciate them first as an individual before we acknowledge that disability that they might have if they have it. But it also includes, changing terms such as saying, maybe first year instead of freshman, or continuing students instead of upperclassmen, just to be a little bit more inclusive in acknowledging that we do sometimes use very gendered language that can be kind of isolating for others when we're talking in a group setting. And this also kind of extends to like cultural sensitive idioms, for example, like, let's have a powwow, and how that might be considered disrespectful to someone within the group who identifies as Native or Native American or Indigenous, for example, right? So just making those small changes within our daily language of how we're interacting with others, just to kind of set that tone of acknowledging our differences, but then also turning around and respecting that, and valuing those differences as well. And so when going into your inclusive programming, there are a few key areas where you can really start to put these things into action. For example, we've gone over the utilizing gender inclusive communication, such as pronouns, but also gender inclusive bathrooms, which is it's also considered accessibility as well. So being mindful of, if I have an event in a certain space, are there gender inclusive bathrooms around that space for my participants to go to? And do I know where those bathrooms are? So just being mindful of like where bathrooms are located, if they're gender inclusive or not, where you can point people towards, maybe like a single occupancy bathroom, for example, as well. But also like further accessibility concerns, such as like timing, physical access, disability accessibilities. Um, I think that our campus is fairly flat, but it can be kind of hard to get from area to area because our campus is very spread out. So for in-person events, just being mindful of, you know, is my space accessible to others? Like, are there stairs? Is there an elevator? Does the elevator work? That's also something that I think we can sometimes forget in programming, which is like we have a programming in a space and there's an elevator, but if the elevator is not working, then people will have to use the stairs. And if someone is unable to use the stairs, how will they get to our event? And the next is just representation. So having heard voices, celebrating accomplishments, and collaboration. Um, really thinking about representation. Are you hearing input from a diverse group of students? And if not, how can you receive that input? So really ensuring that maybe you do a survey and that survey is sent out to all students within a space, or that you're putting the survey link on a website for anyone to access. And the next is celebrating accomplishments. So is there programming that can possibly celebrate a group in particular, such as Mental Health Awareness Day or Veterans Day, Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month? And can you maybe collaborate with a multicultural group or one of our resource centers on campus in order to get that programming done? So, it's just ensuring that you're covering all of the bases and that you're really going the extra mile to see if everyone is included in some form, and really pushing yourself outside of your own comfort zone in order to have impactful and inclusive programming. And so you don't need to have events within every single Heritage Month, for example. But just, if you are able to, and if the opportunity provides itself, then really reaching out to other resources or campus departments, or even local organizations to see how you can collaborate on some of those efforts. So going back to our accessibility considerations, during a program, some of the things that you might want to keep in mind are parking, for example. This question comes up a lot in terms of orientation, for example, right? Which is there accessible parking available? And is there signage in place? Is there some kind of accessible route from parking to our drop-off entrance, for example, in case the parking lot is very far from our event? Restrooms, are accessible restrooms available, and is there signage? And just to keep in mind, I think what I also see oftentimes with signage is arrows. So making sure that the signage is bold and very visible and that you have arrows pointing in the right direction. I think oftentimes I see arrows pointing in the wrong direction. So just double checking that before you put the signage up. But also that you can give as much clear direction as possible before an event. I think oftentimes people like to kind of really scope out where they're going before they get there if they're in a space that's unfamiliar to them. So giving as much direction as possible, such as, it's on level 2, room 208. You want to make a right as soon as you step into the price center, or directions such as that. But also, like, do we have primary entrances accessible? If not, do we have an alternative accessible entrance? Are there stairs to our venue or a stage? And if there are stairs, is there some kind of ramp or lift? And how do we make sure that we can use that if we need to? And so a really good way to let other students know that you are open to accepting accommodations is to simply put some kind of text on the bottom of your flyer that just says, like, for general information or to request an accommodation, you can contact us at this email. This event is accessible. Service animals are allowed as long as they are specifically trained to assist you. And that it abides with other campus policies surrounding, like, having animals on campus, for example. And some more accessibility considerations that we can keep in mind are things such as, like, interpreting and captioning. Captioning is really helpful, especially now that we're using Zoom. In that if you're having a webinar, for example, being able to add captions or adding some kind of live transcription program that will transcribe your speech for you and create a text document afterwards. And you can always contact, like, our Disability Counseling and Consulting Center. You can contact the Office for Students with Disabilities, and you can also contact Triton Mobility Services with help for any considerations of accessibility during your program. And they'll also work with your student as well. And so going a little bit more into our virtual community, now that we are using Zoom a lot more and having a lot more virtual programs, some of the things that I think would be really helpful to keep in mind is, first of all, setting up guidelines. So really setting up guidelines for how you would like everyone to conduct themselves in your space. Are you setting up your expectations up front? Like, hi, this is a safe community. We're going to abide by our principles of community, and we're also moderating our event, or we're moderating the chat of our event, just so everyone is aware of how they'll be held accountable in any case, but also so that everyone knows the expectations that we're requiring of them as they're entering our programs in our virtual spaces. The next is accessibility across devices. So for example, let's say you want to have like an Animal Crossing event. This would entail having participants use a Nintendo Switch, which not everyone might have, and that can also be a device that's considered a high expense item to some people. So it might not be a really inclusive event idea, although it might be fun and it might be trendy. You either might not get a very high participation, or it might just not be a very inclusive event idea. So it might just be in a program that you might avoid for the time being, unless you have some kind of way of providing alternatives for students to interact with your program. And the next is, can it be accessed via laptops or mobile or or tablet devices? Just in case, maybe someone's having some kind of technical issues with their laptops, can they maybe just like log in onto their phone and participate in that way? The next is time zone. So especially now that we're virtual and we're all kind of zooming in from different areas and locations, keeping in mind that not everyone might be in the same time zone, not everyone might be located within our California PDT time. So either outlining some programming that is being held within later times at the day for international students to interact with you, or making sure that as you're creating your marketing and you're sharing your program, that you're including what time zone you're in, so that everyone is aware of what time the actual event will be held in. And the next is marketing and visual impairments or platform restrictions, as well as supplies. So let's say you want to do a crafting or DIY event. You should consider, will I be able to provide these materials? And if not, can I choose a DIY where people can do it at home easily? And the next is marketing. So as much as we want to have like really cool and flashy marketing, is it something that will be readable for whoever is using maybe text to speech devices? So maybe you can add alt text or post multiple forms of a flyer, such as a flashy flyer one day and a non-motion flyer the next day. And something that we most recently are keeping in mind is personal preferences of social media. So because we're all using Zoom a lot and a lot more frequently nowadays, a lot of our marketing has been on social media platforms such as Instagram or Facebook. But we should also just keep in mind that not everyone is comfortable using social media platforms. And so is there a way where students can access seeing events that doesn't include a social media platform, such as having a calendar on a website or sending out in a weekly newsletter, or through email? And so this is just an example of what a really hard to read image might look like and an easy to read image. So you'll see on the left, the image is a little blurry. There's text on top of an image and the text is kind of transparent. So it's a lot easier to just have maybe like non-scripted text, having really easy to read fonts, and having bright colors to highlight the really important information. And you can also add alt text onto websites as well as social media posts. And then going back to our virtual guidelines, something that Warren has on our website is our virtual guideline at the bottom of our virtual activities tab. And this is just to kind of set the expectations for our online community of we're expecting that everyone joins the conversation at some point, that we're using inclusive language, that we're being respectful, and that everyone respects that this is a safe space. But also that if in the case someone is not doing that, that we have the right to delete content or remove you from the space if you're not abiding by our guidelines. And that we're expecting everyone to kind of adhere to these digital guidelines, as well as our principles of community and any campus conduct surrounding electronic usage or language. And I also like to sometimes just add these guidelines into like a chat, for example, during an online program, just so in case anyone hasn't gone to our website, they're aware of our expectations. And so we'll go into a breakout activity for about 5 minutes. And this breakout activity is called Just by Looking at Me. So what you'll do in your breakout room is go around and share your name, how you identify as, where you're from, two things that you cannot tell just by looking at you, and why that's important for you, or why that's important for others to know about you. So for example, I would say, hi, my name is Snisa. I identify as African American or Black. I am from San Diego, California. Two things that you can't tell just by looking at me is I really like to watch Korean dramas. Um, and I have played water polo for 5 years. And this is really important for me to tell you because I want everyone to know that I enjoy partaking in multicultural forms of entertainment. And also that I don't agree with the stereotype that many African Americans are unable to swim or not very good at swimming. So that's just an example of how you'll go through this activity. So we'll break you out into breakout rooms for the next 5 minutes and we'll bring you back and we'll have a short conversation about that before we end our presentation today. So if in the case for any reason you experience an incident or you see an incident, whether that's in person or online, that you would like our campus to address or look into, you can report incidents of harassment or discrimination or bias at our OPHC office, which is the Office for the Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination. On that website, you can report Zoom bombings. You can also report hate and bias incidents, and that's through an online form that can be submitted anonymously. You can also submit reports to our Office of Student Conduct or to care at SARC, which is our Sexual Assault Resource Center. All of these resources for reportings can be done confidentially and anonymously if needed. And there are staff in place to help walk you through the process of reporting if you need to, and to give you a little bit more information about how the process will continue after you report the incident. So those are just some resources of on-campus departments. You can also at any point always talk to an advisor or a staff member at your college, and they can also help walk you through the process if you're interested or if you're wondering if it's something worth reporting, or if you're just kind of curious. You can always reach out to any of your advisors or staff college members. And so I just wanted to end our presentation today with some resources. One of the resources that I really like is from Fusion Comedy of how microaggressions are like mosquito bites. There is a usage of profanity within this resource, but it is a pretty comprehensive opportunity to learn about why keeping in mind things like inclusive language and our inclusive practices are important, and how not doing so can really affect someone on a day-to-day basis and how that really can build up for them. So I would recommend taking a look at that on YouTube if you're able to after. Next is our Ask a Non-Binary Tumblr. I know that not a lot of people use Tumblr anymore. I am a bit old, so I really enjoy Tumblr, but Ask a Non-Binary Tumblr is a really cool resource to look at a comprehensive list of pronouns. It really gives us a full scope of pronouns where you can familiarize yourself with popular and unique forms of pronouns. So I'd recommend just going through that Tumblr, clicking through the list and kind of checking out those pronoun sets, and seeing how you can incorporate them on a day-to-day basis, just to be aware. Next is the Gender Unicorn. This Gender Unicorn is one resource and a really great infographic to share when we're addressing the breakdown of differences between gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and physical and emotional attraction. I don't have time to go into all of the components of the gender unicorn, but as you can see how everything outlines on a spectrum, and you can look at more resources surrounding that on the transstudent.org website. They also have a lot of really cool activities and resources and other infographics surrounding gender identity and gender expression that you can share with other peers or friends or parents or your student org. Um, and all of it is really simple and fun and easy to understand. So I really highly recommend checking out that website. Oops, let's try to reload that one. Okay, it's okay. Our next slide was just the UCSD Maps. On the UCSD Maps, you can select the gender inclusive bathrooms option, and it will show you all of the gender inclusive bathrooms on campus as of right now. That's a really good resource to check out prior to an in-person event, so that you're aware of what bathrooms are in your surrounding area and if they're gender inclusive or if they're single occupancy usage. And then lastly is the implicit bias testing from Harvard. So the IAT is the implicit association test, and it's a measure within social psychological testing designed to detect the strength of a person's subconscious association between mental representations of an object or concepts in your memory. They now have 3 different implicit testings between social attitudes, health, and featured task. I really highly recommend on your own time just going through that website and checking it out. Implicit bias is, for example, even the smallest things like peanut butter and jelly, like when we think of peanut butter, we often associate it with jelly, for example. So when we have a bias, that means having a preference or aversion for a group or a person. And everyone possesses implicit biases, even those who have high commitments to impartiality like judges. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that our implicit biases are malleable. Our brains are incredibly complex. And so the first step to implicit bias is just being aware and being aware of how you can start to course correct your actions and decisions using the knowledge that you know about your own bias. What really matters here, like I said, is taking accountability and being honest and being open to making some of those corrective changes. And I just wanted to end with saying, learning is ongoing. It's okay to not know it all. There's a lot that I've shared in this presentation, and there's a lot that I haven't shared in the presentation that we can really dive deep within. But it's okay to not know everything immediately. You might forget to add closed captioning onto a webinar one day or to share your pronouns at the beginning of a meeting. But what really matters is that you're taking that first step to awareness and being mindful in how you can adapt your small interactions to really reinforce that sense of community. And so we're right at our time now. So I'll take this time to end our presentation and thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, I can stick around for a few minutes after to answer any questions that anyone might have, or you can shoot me an email if you'd like to. I know Mario is a really great resource as well. So I'm always open, but thank you all for coming and have a good rest of your week.